Remember a couple years ago when ISIS was a thing? In fact, they were not a thing. It could be said that ISIS was the thing of a couple of years ago, the thing that nearly everyone in the world, everyone who focused at least a little bit on international news, everyone was worried about this ISIS. They were very likely the organization that is going to bring the world to its knees. Now, it's kind of just a vague memory to some people. Some people who didn't pay attention to enough news, they may not even be sure what this whole ISIS business was. But the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria at one point in time was a fearsome organization to tangle with. They were recruiting people from all over the world to come and fight this religious war in the Middle East there. So there were people from the United States, there were people from Venezuela, there were people from Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, Trinidad and Tobago, if you were to take it on a per capita basis, based on the amount of people we have in this island, I think Trinidad and Tobago was one of the #1 recruiting areas for this ISIS. We on a per capita basis, we sent quite a bit of fighters over there. Now, as ISIS has crumbled and it's all a thing in history now, how do you sort it out? The actual technical matters of what do we do to sort out this insanity that played out there for probably the better part of a decade. What do the countries of the world do now to try and sort it out? For one, they are asking Trinidad and Tobago to take back their citizens. As I said, many Trinis went over there to fight. Now, some of them are dead, but some of them went over there with families, and their families are left to come back now. And many governments around the world don't exactly want a lot of those people back, with understandable reason, of course. If you went over to fight for what was basically, or what was seen on the global stage as a terrorist country, they were attempting to create a country out of terrorism. If you went to fight for that country, it's understandable if the country of your birth isn't too enthusiastic to have you back. But there are human rights organizations out there around the world that are campaigning, pleading, bring back these people to your countries. They are suffering in refugee camps all over in the Middle East. In Syria, they need to be repatriated to their home countries. And okay, I understand what they are saying, but there are several points to be made on either side here. There are several points to be made for and against. We're going to look into some of that and see what are the conclusions we can draw out of this. Before we dive in, if you are not yet subscribed, please do hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, like this video if you do like it. If you don't like it, you don't have to hit the like button and lie to us. You can drop a comment. Tell me exactly what you don't like about it. Tell me what you think about the topic, and I will read it and I may respond. So let's dive into this. Bring our children home. Government urged to act on 56 minors in Syria. A Human Rights Watch report has said that of the almost 100 TT nationals being detained in dire conditions in camps in northeast Syria, 56 are children. The group is calling on the government to bring the children and their mothers back to TT as a matter of urgency. Human Rights Watch Counterterrorism Associate Director Letta Taylor said there were approximately 99 TT nationals being held in camps by US-backed Kurdish-led forces in northeast Syria. She was speaking at the launch of the Human Rights Watch report Trinidad and Tobago bring home nationals from northeast Syria at the Cape Hotel, Port of Spain on Tuesday. Okay, I understand she wasn't only there by herself. It wasn't just the Human Rights Watch. There were people from Trinidad with family members over there. But on the Human Rights Watch side, they are a United States company, a United States organization. In case you forgot, the United States were the creators of ISIS. In case you didn't know. Not that they selected people handpicked and went out there and formed the organization. No. They sponsored ISIS in the beginning because the United States didn't like the Syrian president. They wanted to put a little wedge there between the Syrian president and his people. They wanted to do, I don't know how many of you remember the Arab Spring uprising, where several countries in that Middle East area had popular uprisings where they overthrew their government. There was an attempt to do that very same thing in Syria. Allegations that the Syrian president gassed his own people and all of those things, those allegations were never corroborated, just by the way. But in pursuit of that goal of getting rid of the Syrian president, the United States sponsored the rebels inside of Syria. There were organizations, there were people, there were groups that hated the Syrian president. They wanted to rebel against him, and the United States propped up some of those groups. Ironically, as has happened time and time and time again, and maybe happening again in Ukraine, just by the way, many of the rebels that the US supported initially joined together to create their own little terrorist organization. And then you were seeing ISIS out there that the US was now fighting as an enemy. They were fighting, and you were seeing vans with Bob's Plumbing from Oklahoma, and ISIS is driving around in Bob's Plumbing Supplies van from Oklahoma, because these were stocks sponsored by the US. So just by the way, I find it strange now that the Human Rights Watch is attempting to, throw this on Trinidad and Tobago. You must bring back these people and deal with them, while it was your country of origin that created this whole problem in the very beginning. But either way, she went on to say, we are calling on the TT government to promptly repatriate their citizens. If they can't take everyone at the same time, they should focus on the most vulnerable, the women and the children. The adults can be prosecuted if necessary. The report said there are 56 children and 21 women being held in 2 camps, and 13 males, including a teenage boy, in detention centers. Now, here's the thing. I spoke about this in a live before, and the question I keep asking myself, the question that I must keep coming back to, is how can it be that only the men that went were seen as a risk, as a threat? How is it that the women, who some of them willingly went over there, many of them willingly went over there, they were adults when they went over there, how is it that they are not seen as threats? You're saying, okay, we must bring back the women. Why? Why the women? Okay, the children can make sense. The children, many of them didn't choose to go over there. There's a 17-year-old boy who was taken to Syria in 2014. I don't know if he was 17 when he was taken there. If he's 17 now and he was taken there back in 2014, that was what, 8 years ago? 8 minus 17, he would have been a 9-year-old boy back then. And if that's the case, you could understand you don't put much blame on a 9-year-old boy. And he said, my father lied to me. He told me that we were going to Disneyland. It's not my fault. It's my father's fault. I wish I never came here in Syria. I just want to come back home, I understand that plight. A 9-year-old boy, you're pretty much totally under the control of your parents. Understandable. But the mothers, where did we get this idea that the mothers were totally victims, that the mothers didn't know what they were doing somehow? How is it that women are seen somehow as being, as not having agency in this case? These women were not from Islamic countries or extremist Islamic countries where they didn't have a say. They were from Trinidad and Tobago. Their husbands didn't kidnap them to carry them over. The Human Rights Watch Children's Rights Division Advocacy Director, Joe Becker, said a survey of over 100 children worldwide who had been repatriated to their home countries from detention camps showed that they had reintegrated into their societies well. They are facing extreme hardships, as children in the camps have died in tent fires, drowned in sewage pits, been hit and killed by water trucks, and hundreds have died from treatable illnesses. Mothers hide them in their tents to protect them from sexual predators, abusive camp guards, and ISIS recruiters and fighters. Male children as young as 12 are taken away to detention centers where they are held indefinitely without contact with their families. Brutal. Becker said research had shown that the sooner children were repatriated, the easier it was for them to reintegrate into society. That would make sense, though. The faster the children come back here, the faster they would be able to reintegrate to our society. That makes sense. She noted that there had been cases of children who had returned to TT being unable to access education and healthcare because of a lack of documents. She said that this was not unique to TT, and the organization would be looking into those cases. Returning nationals can face TT criminal courts. Taylor addressed concerns expressed by the population, including why people who had gone to fight with ISIS should be repatriated when there was already a crime wave. Most of the Trinidadians are children. They did not choose to go to Syria. There are only about 8 men detained in Syria from Titi who went over as adults, and only 5 youths who went over as young children. Most of the women went over as adults, but most of them, like the children, are also victims of ISIS. How? How did we reach that conclusion? Most of the women who went over as adults are victims of ISIS. How? How is that so? You spent money to take yourself as an adult from a free, peaceful country and carry yourself to the Middle East. When you reach to the Middle East, granted, the ISIS fighters, the ISIS organization, they weren't known for their human rights. They weren't known for their equal rights. Yes, when some women reached over there, they may have become victims. They may not have known fully what they signed up for. That might be true. Some of them may have been victimized. But how do we reach to the belief that women, adults who decided to go over there willingly are all victims? How is that conclusion brought? Like, she just throws that out there, but there's no way to verify that conclusion. How did she reach that conclusion? Are women just automatically victims? Are we to see females as automatically being victims? Whatever happened to the equal rights in that case? I think we are humans. I think women, just as men, are able of having agency and making decisions on their own. Which means when women make the bad decisions, they have to face the consequences of those decisions just as much. She went on, we believe Titi has the capacity to manage this population. Titi has laws on the books to prosecute adults if they commit serious crimes. If there were any Titi nationals who had committed serious crimes who are in northeast Syria, their victims and family members deserve to see justice served. Now, if you committed a serious crime as an ISIS fighter, who is your victim? How are we going to prosecute this in the Trinidad courts? You're saying that the Trinidad has a good legal structure. You know, Trinidad and Tobago has a strong legal structure. We can prosecute the... How? Who is bringing the complaint against the ISIS fighter? How are we to even know what the crimes are that they committed? If they are in a refugee camp now, there would have been years between some of the crimes they did and this present moment. Do you think when we repatriate them, they're going to land in Trinidad and say, okay, well, here's a list of all the wrong things I did while I was over there. You can prosecute me for it. I don't believe that's going to happen. So how do we do this? Not that I don't understand or I don't agree that some of the children may indeed be suffering. Some of them may indeed be in some really terrible situations. But how do we figure out who would be a threat and who would not be a threat? And in a case like this, where people willingly chose to leave the country to go do something else like this, is it on the country really to bring them back and put ourselves in danger for this? Is it really? I spoke to 3 Titi detainees, 2 women and 1 man who went over as adults. They sounded broken and said they would be willing to serve time if their government would just take them back and let their children restart their lives in their homeland. Okay, the 2 women and man that she spoke to said they were willing to serve time. How are we going to get them to serve time? This sounds like something where we would have to create a whole new legal framework to prosecute some people on just the suspicion of crimes. The way I would see this, I remember I spoke about this in a live previously. The way I see some of this, to me, if you leave your country to go fight for a hostile foreign power, that's treason. That's the way I see it. And any adult who engaged in that, that's treason. That's treason. You should never be, in my book, free inside of this country again. You are disloyal to your country. Treason in many countries, in probably the majority of countries, is prosecutable by death. The reason being that if we as a unit, we are here as a unit, as a country, when we work together, the reason we work together is to survive. We're working together for our survival. If someone is inside this country and working against this country, they're basically trying to destroy this. People who are inside of this society group, inside of this cultural group here, they could say that, well, this person wants to kill us to some extent. That's what treason is. They're working against our benefit. So the consequences usually are of that kind of dire nature. And in this case, where the consequence doesn't even have to be paid out by the people here, all you have to do is say, no, we're not taking you back. You could understand why it would be a very tempting thing for most people to say. She suggested that for the trials, a brief special chamber could be set up to move the cases through the system more quickly, especially as specialist expertise would be needed and there would be security considerations. And here's the thing. This is Trinidad and Tobago. There are people sitting right now in the remand yard, waiting on their case to call for 10 years. How is it going to be that I was arrested on suspicion of some crime back in 2012, 10 years ago? I'm still in remand. My case hasn't finished yet. And then you are going to tell me that you're going to pick up people who went to fight for terrorists. That's the way I would see it. Went to fight for terrorists on the opposite side of the world. You are going to pick them up, bring them back, create a whole new special court system to expedite their cases. How is that going to be fair? Risk of inaction is great. Taylor said the US military had said it was willing to assist in the repatriation of TT citizens by providing a plane which could hold all of the nationals. She said the people in charge of the camps had also been asking countries to repatriate their nationals, as they did not have enough funding. The risk of inaction is great. The head of counterterrorism at the UN has said that a failure to repatriate threatens to bring about the very outcomes we attempt to prevent, including the radicalization and recruitment of a new generation of terrorists. And that's true. That's true. If you just leave them out there at the whims of nature, at the whims of whatever dangers are out there, the chances are that you may end up with a whole other generation of radicalized people, of people who hate the world, people who would have been born in all different areas of the world, and they hate all areas of the world. That's a dangerous thing to recreate in that area. I'm not totally sure what the solution might be, because if you think about this, what may be happening is they may be becoming radicalized. Do you think the process of radicalization has begun already? I might say yes. And if the process of radicalization has already begun, isn't it a safe assumption that some of the 100 people we're attempting to bring back into Trinidad may have already been radicalized, at least to some extent? How do you test that? Is there a court case that you could do? Is there some kind of legal prescription that you could put on them to figure out how radicalized they are? Or would we just have to wait to see if anything happens, what's going to happen, or anything like that? The government, however, is saying that they're working on it. The Trinidad and Tobago government. The AG's statement said in its response to a February 1st letter from the Human Rights Watch that TT understands what is required and in the best interest of its nationals, including their physical and psychological health and welfare, their fundamental rights, and the national security and public interest considerations involved. And all of this was being actively addressed and balanced. It was misleading of the Human Rights Watch to say that the TT government has not taken steps to help its nationals, or that the Nightingale team is not actively engaged in evaluating the national security considerations, together with all pertinent considerations relevant to the return of our nationals. Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Minister Dr. Amory Brown said, as the AG has already clearly stated, the government is committed to taking all appropriate actions in keeping with the complex and serious national security implications and other considerations associated with individuals returning from conflict zones overseas. And such work is ongoing. I mean, that sounds like a very political statement. That could mean anything, but they are not ignorant of the fact, at least that's what they're saying, and they are not ignorant of the fact that there are national security measures to balance with the human rights measures, etc. That's understandable. And you see, the thing is, you have to understand this from the Trinidad and Tobago context. There was a reason in the first place that Trinidad and Tobago offered up so many volunteers to ISIS. We already have an atmosphere in Trinidad. We already have a grounds in Trinidad that is pretty sympathetic to some of those views. If we already had that in Trinidad over 10 years ago, don't you stand the chance of increasing that risk by bringing back more people like that? You understand that? Trinidad and Tobago it is known in Trinidad and Tobago that there are Muslim gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. Part of the gang underworld. You may argue whether they are indeed religious or not. That's not my argument here. They call themselves Muslims and they behave and follow the visual tenets of Islam. Many of those people were the people who left for ISIS in the first place. You bring back some. Is it possible you strengthen that Muslim gang in Trinidad again? These are considerations that a government would have to take in. These are considerations that a government would have to keep in mind when they're making decisions like this. And I saw a nice mirror to some of this case looking over in Great Britain. This has been in the news for a long time now. And recently, there was a ruling on this. Intel brief. Shamima Begum and the difficulty of balancing security, humanitarian concerns, and accountability. Last week, an immigration court in the United Kingdom issued a ruling that makes it unlikely that British-born Shamima Begum, who left London at the age of 15 to join ISIS, can ever return to her home country, despite what the court deemed credible suspicion she was trafficked. A court in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, ruled she cannot regain her citizenship. The revocation of her citizenship was correct. Now, this young lady went over to ISIS at the age of 15. That's a minor. Yet, still, their courts in the United Kingdom ruled that the decision she made has made her too much of a risk for the population of England, for the English population. So it's understandable, it's within their legal framework to revoke her citizenship. That's the United Kingdom. First world country. 15-year-old girl went over to ISIS and she cannot return. And in this article, they spoke about the fact that while Begum's case serves to highlight the plight of women and children in displacement camps, it also highlights the even more precarious fates of adult men and young boys that many states have so far refused to repatriate. I think some of the action that the Human Rights Watch is calling for there is sexist. It's a global level of sexism that the Human Rights Watch is aiming for. Okay, we're going to go into countries all around the world and tell them they have to take back their women, but forget about the men. That's sexist in and of itself. By nature, that's sexism. Some of these women are guilty of the same crimes. They made the same choice that the men made. How are they to be pardoned? How are they to be repatriated but leave the men to suffer in squalor? That sounds like sexism to me. That's all I have for now, though. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. Should we really repatriate all of these people? They should come back to their home country. We owe it to them, or yikes. Tell me what you think. That's all I have for now. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I will see you in the next video.